Spinach is the top of the list of everybody's fabulous best food that everyone should have, and they're even giving it to young children, which is frightening.
My guest is Sally Norton, author of Toxic Superfoods, How Oxalate Overload is Making You Sick and How to Get Better.
Sally K. Norton holds a nutrition degree from Cornell University and a master's degree in public health.
She is widely known as really an expert on oxalates.
Oxalate problems increase the chances you've got fungal problems, low-grade anxiety, low-grade depression, all kinds of mood problems, including very negative outlook and gloomy future, and that's all neuroinflammation, which is really disturbing because you can be living by what you think is the right thing and hurting yourself.
So I'm just all turned around. I'm like, okay, well, what's the best thing that I could be doing?
What we're trying to do is warn people that you could be eating these foods in such a way that you're in a dangerous level of exposure, and that will eventually degrade your tissues and you'll end up with osteopenia or damage to your bone marrow.
I have been asking this question to so many people, I can't figure out an answer.
I think anyone would be crazy to be living on almonds, almond butter, almond flour, using almonds as food because you think they're healthy. That's just misinformation. I don't think that keto is the answer to all diseases. I think most of us in the long run need some carbs. That's the biggest weakness overall. So that's my biggest prescription is.
So I want to start with an icebreaker question, which is, if you could only choose one food that you would never in a million years eat ever again, and one food that you would eat every day, which food would be the loser and winner?
Well, let's see. I guess I would never touch Swiss chard again. I used to eat that a lot. The chard, the beet greens, and the spinach. Well, no, this is a tough one because maybe it would be the almonds. I think almonds are worse. So I would put almonds on the top of the list of the food I wouldn't eat.
Okay. And the food that you would eat every day?
Probably fish. A low mercury fish. A fish that doesn't have mercury and hopefully hasn't lived long enough to pick up toxins from the ocean like the microplastics, which is, it's so sad that we're destroying really what's generating so much of the life in this planet is the oceans, and we're just treating it like a garbage can.
I just had somebody leave a comment the other day saying to stop making it seem like a bigger deal than it is, like the oceans and the soil health, because I've heard statistics that someone 100 years ago, when they ate one orange, we would now have to eat 7 oranges to get the same nutrients from that one orange someone ate 100 years ago because of the soil health. And then like you're also mentioning the oceans, and people are like, oh, stop blowing things out of proportion. It's really not that big of a deal. Or it's not as bad as it may seem. Sure, it's got a little bit worse, but how is the food going to be for my grandkids one day? I can't even imagine.
To me, that's the important point, that we're being too casual about what we're doing now and its effects in the future. So where we are now is because of decisions in the past that we didn't make. I mean, certain things should be sacred. And I think clean air, clean water, and an ecosystem that supports life on the planet ought to be pretty important. And it doesn't seem to matter to the point of people can't get away from their plastic bags at the store, their plug-in air fresheners, to basically all this optional stuff that is really just garbage in the making. And to me, because I have this real eco heart of wanting cleanness, probably because I've been so poisoned by so many levels of stuff, that it's just part of being in touch with the life spirit. They say there's a karmic energy, what you put out is what you get back. And you put out a lot of toxic stuff emotionally, spiritually, and physically, then you live in a toxic world.
I can't help but think that some people are thinking this is, oh, woo woo, or it's too, what can I actually do on my personal level each day to make better choices? Because is it really going to make that big of a deal? I'm just one person. There's 7 billion people. So if I stop using my plastic bags at the grocery store, it's not going to make that much of a difference.
And to me, that matters less than living in integrity with yourself. If you don't have the values to guide your sense of right and wrong in life, and you don't live by values that guide your sense of right and wrong, how can you have a strong relationship with yourself? How do you feel good about yourself? How do you make your priorities and decide what to do or not? Or you need some way to make decisions in your life, and some way to feel like your life is of value, and that if you're in a contribution mode, a mode of engagement in things that matter to you and you know what matters, then you can find joy, you can find satisfaction in this life and not be beset with despair from being lost soul. And you need some kind of compass to go on. And I think ignoring the spiritual and the connectedness of us at all these levels, you erode your relationship with yourself.
I love that. Now, you had mentioned things like spinach and almonds and things that sound like, well, I'm taking care of myself. I'm being the healthy version of myself, having these things. I myself, Lillie, had, I'm not even kidding, raw spinach every single day for 6 years. I wouldn't put ranch. I wouldn't put croutons. I would just eat the spinach straight out of the bag, handfuls of it, because if I ate my spinach, then I could have my cookies. I was a track and field athlete for 8 years. And so I did hurdling and jumping, and my knee pain, I was like, well, that makes sense. I'm a runner. I'm going to have knee pain. I stopped running. I still had knee pain. I stopped eating processed foods. I still had knee pain. And then boom, click, click, I hear about oxalates. And I'm like, I've been having spinach every day because I'm trying to honor my body and do the healthy thing. So could you talk more about, you have toxic superfoods right behind you, spinach being one of those beautiful things staring at me. It's funny because when you said that the foods that you wouldn't eat ever again would be spinach or almonds, I was thinking more like, hot Cheetos and donuts, but I don't think we consider those as foods. So,
Right.
so hypothetically, let's say
they wouldn't even come up in my mind bubble of food. Like I've been cooking from scratch and eating real food since I was a little kid. And those were never considered real food. Those were like weird entertainments for New Year's Eve. And that was the end of it. Then we're done for the year. Like that, I just wasn't even, Halloween was some event, and then we were done with that. So yeah, I don't have the thought bubble of this stuff in these bright packages that crunch and salt and weird artificial, doesn't even count as food.
Right. Well, and we do a lot of shopping from our local farmer. So we don't actually go into the grocery stores really to buy food, except for when we go and film like little TikToks and Instagrams, then we'll go and use the props of all the foods in the store. And I just am so shocked by, there's 40 aisles in a store, 38 of them. I would not go down. It's absolutely insane. And they're not.
I went in the store yesterday. And I'm like, why do I always come out with just a few things? Why is there, I'm looking, there's nothing in here to buy. So yeah, the store is a weird experience too, because so little of what's there is that edible.
Right. That's not, going back to like serving your body or living with your principles and values. It's so hard to say like, don't eat those foods because that is like what is available for everybody in the masses, and it's glowing at them and glistening, and they have these fond memories and social events and work and travel and all these things that you really sound like you're being very strict saying that people can't have those or that that's not real food. But let's hypothetically pretend we're living in a magical world where those things don't exist and we're just eating real whole single ingredient foods. Now, some people like myself having the spinach, that was a problem still. So certain people may run into problems even eating real whole single ingredient foods.
Exactly. That's the shock. That's what's so shocking. And the connection already between, okay, I'm living by my values. I'm going to eat these healthy whole foods. I'm going to follow the advice. Spinach is the top of the list of everybody's fabulous best food that everyone should have. And they're even giving it to young children, which is frightening. And so they are living in integrity. The people who are eating the spinach are attempting to live in some like awareness of taking care of themselves and doing the right thing and following health advice, following nutrition advice. And so they're trying to do the right thing. And it turns out it isn't the right thing, which is really disturbing because you can be living by what you think is the right thing and hurting yourself, like with your poor knees. And aches and pains are a classic sign that you're getting too much oxalate.
So I guess to make things simple for people to understand and conceptualize, if they've never heard of oxalates before, kind of how I understand it, and then maybe you could take it off more into the details and more of the nuance of it. But my understanding of oxalates is that Mother Nature created two sources of food groups, plant foods and animal foods. And all living things, their goal is to survive, reproduce, and have viable offspring, so that way the species can continue. Now, with animals, they can fly, swim, jump, run away from predators. They have fangs, claws, they can give off venom. Whereas with plants, they are stuck in the ground. So if an animal tries to eat them or a predator tries to attack them, they can't run away in the same way that an animal can. So they have created what's called anti-nutrients or plant toxins like oxalates, phytic acid, lectins, and other plant toxins, where if an animal or a predator tries to eat them, it can hopefully prevent them from completely eating the plant and the plant can continue to survive. Now, having these anti-nutrients in small amounts, maybe not an issue for everybody, but there are certain foods that are higher in different plant toxins, one being oxalates, that people nowadays in society have access to year round, where certain plant foods, they were more seasonal. And so people weren't exposed to these specific plant foods over and over again, day in and day out, that are now causing people more issues.
Right. So we have a capacity to handle a certain amount of plants because humans have been playing around with plants and using plants as medicine for a very long time. And, even when you're using a medicine, there's always a degree of toxicity. That's partly how it works. It triggers some kind of healing response. The thing is, we have an upper limit with all of these, and your limit is going to be different one person to the next. But all of us, at the best of human health, there's some upper limit for even the toughest of us. And that upper limit's way lower than people assume. So even though you can have some doesn't mean you can have the amount you're eating. Because as you say, we're eating beyond seasonality, so we don't even take a break. So 12 months every year, year after year after year, these high oxalate foods are on the menu. We didn't have that possibility until we invented the railroads and refrigeration and the grocery store and the home refrigerator and all these things that weren't commonly available. Peanuts were not a human food until 150 years ago. Potatoes, humans didn't really start playing around with potatoes till 400 years ago. The things that you eat every day, the French fries, the chips, the junk food, that form of those foods is less than 50 years old in many cases. You're eating novel stuff routinely as if it's okay because it's culturally okay. It's available, it's affordable, it's cute, it's convenient, but it doesn't mean just because of all those things. And that environment that's making it available, cute, and convenient is driven by its cheapness and the power to make money from selling it. So those are the things that are driving it. It makes it acceptable culturally, but it doesn't mean that the biology of you is into it.
And what are the cons to having too many oxalates? Like what are signs and symptoms that people could look out for to recognize if they're having too many oxalates?
Some people, it's urinary tract. So you might have a jumpy bladder where you're running to the bathroom too often or waking up overnight, or you could actually end up with a kidney stone. Some 12 to maybe 16% of us are not as good at handling high loads of oxalate routinely. So that portion of the population will eventually show up with a kidney stone. But other people will just get interstitial cystitis, which is a painful, jumpy bladder. So the urinary tract is one sign. Pelvic issues generally, if you get yeast infections, if you have burning genitals, if you get itching down there without infections, if you get UTIs, because chronic infections are a sign that you may have oxalate poisoning that's causing damage to your immune system and damage to the barrier function in these mucous membranes. So if you've had chronic sinuses, chronic yeast infections, UTIs, and those kinds of things, that's a sign. Something's irritating your immune cells and your mucosal membrane. If you get a lot of phlegm a lot, with or without infections, a lot of allergies, autoimmune problems, if you have a lot of neurological symptoms, which can be tremoring and twitching and hiccups and mood problems. This one is really surprising to me. Oxalate causes a lot of neuro damage, which includes neuroinflammation. And that can be apathy, lack of excitement, enthusiasm for life. It can be low-grade anxiety, low-grade depression, all kinds of mood problems, including very negative outlook and gloomy future and lots of fear, putting out a lot of fear. That's all neuroinflammation. I'm just so surprised at how many people have mental health, supposed mental health issues that get better when they get oxalate out of their diet. It's fantastic. It's fantastic because, that's really your spirit and a soul hanging on the vine here, getting destroyed by poisoning. So the other things with neurotoxicity can be eye-hand coordination. If you're inconsistent in your dance practice or in your shooting practice, or if you just bump into stuff a lot, then you have issues with eye-hand coordination. If you have vision issues, if you're needing glasses too early in life or ever, if you've got night vision problems, cataracts, all kinds of visual decay can be a sign of oxalate. Dental decay, where you have lots of infections or dental pain. If you get tartar on the teeth, that's a sign of lots of oxalate in the blood. Then if you get rheumatological problems like your poor knee bothering you, any kind of arthritic, bursitis, itis-y things with joints can be oxalates. Stomach problems. This is really classic with oxalates is you have some kind of digestive complaint. It could be acid reflux. It can be irritable bowel. It can get as bad as Crohn's disease and really inflammatory bowel diseases, alternating constipation and diarrhea, just all kinds of stomach complaints, bloating.
Sounds like it's like the whole list of everything you would ever never want.
Oh yeah, and skin problems. That's one that's like eczema, dandruff, rashes, itching, unexplained skin issues. That's a big area too. Yeah, anything basically.
So which foods are highest in oxalates for people who are like, no, I don't want any of that. And also, well, I guess let's just start first with that question is which foods are going to be the highest in oxalates? So
in the vegetable department, there are those 3 dark leafy greens, the spinach, kale, and chard, and the bottom beets aren't so good. Okra is not so great. Sweet potatoes, anything with bran. The bran has heavy in oxalates. So whole grain, anything or bran fraction, bran enhanced protein shakes are loaded with oxalate, as is everything with cacao in it. It's the dark cocoa powder that's high in oxalate. So dark chocolate, cocoa, fudgy stuff, double chocolate, anything. Turmeric and slippery elm. Tea is high, not coffee. The nuts, the almonds, cashews, and peanuts being the worst ones. Quinoa, buckwheat, teff, arrowroot, cassava, hemp, and chia seeds. The whole chia bowl thing. Like, where did that come from? Why do you think that's food? Why do you think you can have that every day? You probably shouldn't. In the fruit department, there's star fruit, whole pomegranate, kiwi, and blackberries. If you're using those a lot, that's trouble. Even though a lot of them have crystals, the crystals cause enough inflammation, it can cause total body inflammation and cause arthritis. Whether or not you're even absorbing the oxalates, just the crystal part of it. Plants have all these different crystals, some of them tiny, some big, some are pointed toothpicks. They're literally double-ended blow darts where the plants are deliberately doing it in that defensive way, like you mentioned earlier. The plants make oxalates to defend themselves. Those crystals are very clearly about self-defense, but there's many other roles there. But just eating, even the fruits that are high in oxalate, they're full enough of these crystals that's increasing inflammation in the digestive tract and then increasing total body inflammation. So what other itis you're prone to, it might turn back on your knee pain, for example.
According to the USDA, less than 2% of Americans get enough potassium in their diets, meaning 98% of us may be deficient in potassium. And potassium is critical for heart, muscle, and nerve function. Someone deficient in potassium may experience increased blood pressure, irregular heartbeats, fatigue, cramping, and constipation. One way that I get more potassium in my diet is through a drink mix called Element, which not only provides me more potassium, but also sodium and magnesium without any sugar, artificial food colorings, or nasty ingredients in it. I'll add the orange flavored packet into my milk to give me kind of a dreamsicle-y drink, or I'll have the raspberry and watermelon in my water throughout the day, which keeps me hydrated. You can get 8 free packets of all of Element's different flavors with any order by going to the link in the description. And Element does have a money-back guarantee, so if you don't enjoy it, you can get your money back without any hassle. But again, you can get those 8 free packets of Element by going to the link in the description or the URL drinkelement.com/Lillie Kane. So how would someone know if they're specific, let's say, for example, when you mentioned UTIs, and I actually hadn't heard of that one, UTIs and yeast infections I used to have very often. I don't have those anymore. I actually related that more towards not having gluten and sugar, but it could have been oxalates this whole time now.
I would put money on it. It was the oxalates, not the sugar. Go try a sugar experiment. I don't think you'll bring back your yeast infection.
Okay, so how would someone know, though, with all these other symptoms, that it is from oxalates versus something else? Because I think you
don't have to know that. But what you need to know that if you have any of those conditions, having high oxalate foods in your diet will keep those conditions in place and make you suffer longer.
Okay.
You won't resolve them if you don't deal with the oxalate issue. And then you haven't dealt with the oxalate issue if you've only done this diet for 6 weeks, because you're full of oxalate crystals from all your years of spinach. So every time you ate spinach that was beyond your ability to excrete it, it was accumulating in your knee joint and your thyroid gland and your shoulder and your bone marrow. And that's going to persist. You've got traces of this stuff already on board. So you maintain a certain degree of oxalate poisoning because of the bioaccumulation. So it's a little confusing because you can get off it dietarily and feel okay for a couple of weeks, a month, a year, 2 years, and then you don't feel well again. And that might be because of oxalate coming back out of the tissue. And now you're raising your oxalate levels in your bloodstream and your bladder, and you can get the funky bladder symptoms coming back here and there, or getting up at night again. Recognize that if you have a history of either leaky gut where you're absorbing a lot of it, or a history, either one, of eating a lot of potato products or a lot of peanuts or these other high oxalate foods, you have a bioaccumulation in your body. It's standard now. You can't get out of childhood without accumulating oxalates.
So I would say lucky for me that I'm younger than many people probably watching this. And so I only had so many years of eating spinach and peanut butter every day, because we keep mentioning peanuts. Whereas other people, they maybe have a decade of eating these things or multiple decades of eating these things. How long would it take for them to release all these oxalates from their body? Or are they totally doomed for end all be all and they might as well just keep eating them?
Well, in a way, you get to keep eating them a little bit because it helps to keep them in place. If they're hidden away in tissues, not causing any problems, that's a little more pleasant to live with because you have no symptoms. So keeping some oxalate around is great. But what we're trying to do is warn people that you could be eating these foods in such a way that you're in a dangerous level of exposure frequently enough that you continue that bioaccumulation process. And that will eventually degrade your tissues, and you'll end up with some degree of osteopenia or damage to your bone marrow and so on. And the acute exposure day to day is causing acute issues with your circulating blood cells and your vascular system and all the organs and tissues that are getting just a little hit 4 hours after you had that food. So you've got the acute effects, which many of the times you don't see the symptoms. You never know to connect that 4 hours ago you had your peanut butter, spinach, whatever. And now you're like a little grumpy, you're having trouble falling asleep, or have a little knee inflammation or a little restless legs at bedtime. You wouldn't connect it.
Right.
But you're less likely even more to connect it once you get these out of your diet. If you go on a meat heavy diet and you cut out a lot of plant foods, chances are you're drastically lowering your oxalate exposure. And at some point, you may not feel so good then either. And that's because you're still loaded up with it. So how long it takes for you to get it out of your bone marrow and your shoulder and your knee and your eyeballs and your brain, nobody's studied that. So all we have is people who are doing the diet consciously with real support, real understanding of what's going on with their body, and be able to see the external signs of oxalate coming out. Some people can see it with cloudy urine, because if you have a lot of crystals in your urine, you're peeing out a lot of urine that might look cloudy when you're doing that, or you might actually see crystals in your stools, or feel them, or get hemorrhoids from that, or get boils and stuff flaking off your skin, or see tartar on your teeth, or crummy, gritty stuff around the eye secretions coming out, and like it can leave a white crust on your face in the morning from this stuff coming out all night long. So that process is observed, and people continue to see it happening easily 10 years after adopting a diet. I'm still sure that my body has still got a lot of oxalate accumulation. I'm about to be finishing my 10th year. So it's almost 10 years and I'm still clearing oxalate, which is a big motive for letting people know, hey, don't become an old toxic dame like me. Like, you could stay young and perky and better and healthier and not have all this unfortunate stuff holding you back in life.
So I'm so happy to be talking to you, because I have been asking this question to so many people. I can't figure out an answer. Now I think I know what you're going to say, but I have had dandruff for so long. I've tried doing a no sugar diet, a strict carnivore diet. I've tried no eggs, no dairy. I've tried changing my pillowcases, my laundry detergent, washing my hair differently. I just started today washing with apple cider vinegar, thinking that might do something, and putting apple cider vinegar on my meat, because my father-in-law, he's a doctor, and he was like, maybe you're just not, your alkaline acidity is off balance, and maybe you've been having too much protein. So maybe have some turmeric, was his first suggestion. And then we were like, oh, we're just going to try the apple cider vinegar route. But anyway, any thoughts on the dandruff issue? And I also related it to stress too, thinking, okay, maybe if I'm more stressed, then I itch the back of my head more. So
I like the acidity alkaline theory, and we can come back around to that, because oxalate creates acidosis in the body. And that acidity creates many problems: insulin resistance, osteoporosis, mood issues, you name it, energy problems. And in terms of the dandruff, you've looked for causes and no response, right? So we would need to look at your situation and see how those symptoms showed up in the past, when you changed your diet to eliminate the high oxalate foods, how the body responded to that. If there's any chance you're still doing some degree of skin excretion, or if you have other head and facial symptoms that suggest that oxalates are affecting the head and face and brain area of the body, or the skin generally, we could piece it together and say, yeah, this sounds like it could be oxalate related. If we know enough of your case, then we can peg it to that, and you'll start to be able to see, well, maybe you're getting dandruff when, or right after you've had a period of fatigue or weirdness or some other issue, which might be a time of oxalate release from the tissues, you see the dandruff, or right before. Like, if you can correlate it, we call this triangulation in science. You need 3 points to hone in on the theory that this dandruff might be related to oxalate poisoning, both the acute exposures and now possibly cyclic exposures to higher levels of oxalate as you're clearing it, or just still an effort to directly push oxalate out of the skin, which can show up as white dust and all kinds of flaky stuff coming off the head.
Even 3 years of doing a very low oxalate diet and still something I'm in a low sugar diet, because people think, oh, well, fungus would feed off the sugar. But then people will say, well, also fungus feeds off of fat. So I'm just all turned around. I'm like, okay, well, what's the best thing that I could be doing? But I feel good. Other than that, I don't really have, like you were mentioning, eye crusts or maybe more skin inflammation. It's really just the back of my head, not even the top.
The back of your head. Yeah. So oxalate problems increase the chance that you've got fungal problems, candida and so on, because it's wrecking the immune system functioning, and it's also causing connective tissue issues, which include this barrier function thing I was saying earlier. So if you get your immune system happy and the connective tissue start to recover, your ability to throw off these infections becomes really good. And then it's like really simple, like some tea tree oil or coconut oil, and like, boom, it's gone. But some people maintain often a sort of autoimmune kind of thing going on. There's some kind of chronic inflammation. The oxalate is a great stimulator of that, because it's this underlying irritant in the tissues that keeps turning on the immune system, who's trying to deal with these problems. Like, the immune system is becoming very reactive and overreactive because it's trying to work on something. It's trying to deal with a problem. It's not just deciding to go rogue. It's because it's got some project that's not going well, and getting rid of oxalate crystals is hard to do. So we can't say for sure, but whether, oxalates has initiated this, whether oxalate release is keeping it going or not, but it won't resolve on a high oxalate diet. I can tell you that. Like, you need this piece in order to resolve it. And then what are the other factors? It might be that it'll just give it more time, because if it is oxalates and you're clearing oxalates, I mean, there may be that might be your one little exit route for now. And with oxalate, usually it changes though. It hangs out one place and then it'll move somewhere else. Right. So you kind of have to watch over time, because there's no test to run. We can't run a test. Even if we were to biopsy the tissue from that area and take a chunk of skin out of there and kind of see what's going on with it, if there was actual crystal accumulation there, or crystals moving into that area, most pathologists won't see it. You can send a biopsy and they come back, no cancer, or no sign of like long-term chronic inflammation or whatever they're looking for. They don't look for the crystals. And I've had a client whose husband was a physician who is an amateur microscope guy go to the dermatologist and reclaim the sample they were keeping on the shelf after they gave the report. The report from this biopsy said nothing. They couldn't find anything, and he got it and he put it under his microscope. And he said, well, except there's oxalate crystals, and here's an oxalate crystal right there in the biopsy sample that the pathologist completely ignored and made no comment about.
Yeah, that can be frustrating. And it's the same thing, I think, not just with oxalates, but all sorts of different tests and things that go on where people they diagnosed me incorrectly, or I got the wrong prescription, and things that happen like that. I don't want people to think that they should avoid all plant food, because when we talk about plants have anti-nutrients or plants have toxins, then people say, well, then forget it, I'm not eating any of them. And if it works for people and that they find more health doing that, fantastic. Though sometimes I think people are purposely, intentionally avoiding plants, thinking if I have some plants, then I'm going to keel over dead tomorrow. So
Or any plant is high oxalate. And so if I'm eating a bite of cauliflower, I'm getting some oxalates. Well, no, you're not necessarily. Right.
so that's what I'm wondering for you. Where you work with clients, where do you suggest people go with diet? Do you suggest hardcore carnivore? Do you suggest somewhere in the middle? Or what's your approach to diet?
I never have a prescription up front. I don't have a prescription for anyone. They come to me saying, I have these issues and this is how I'm eating. And I say, this is how we can improve how you're eating. And I find out what they're allergic to, what their tastes are like, what their aversions are, and what our goals are and what we're trying to achieve. And I ask them about their body and get a sense of if they're too acidic. We got to make sure that we're doing the alkalization and we're doing the lemons or this and that. So I don't have a specific prescription other than I think anyone would be crazy to be living on almonds, almond butter, almond flour, using almonds as food. That's crazy. Using spinach and chard and beet greens because you think they're healthy, that's just misinformation. And you've just been led down a nasty path of self-destruction. Back up out of that one easily. So in some people, it's just a really good idea to go on a tight elimination diet and go off all the plants and simplify to a small menu for a while as an elimination diet. And I think the full carnivore diet makes a good elimination diet for many people, but not everyone can do that. We have allergies to eggs and dairy and even beef and so on. Like, you have to work with reality. You don't just slap on, oh, do it my way or the highway. That is not helpful.
And what do you, I've never heard you answer this question in any video, but what does a day of eating look like for you? And I'm sure every day is different, but are you more plant-based, more animal-based? Are you, hey, whatever I'm feeling like eating that day? How do you approach your personal diet?
Well, unfortunately, I'm a servant to my body and its well-being and its feedback. And my body is just had it. It's just now reactive to lots of stuff. So I'm on this narrow path of foods, of living on pork and fish and coconut and some squashes and some papaya and occasional juice and coconut water and it's butter. It's a pretty limited diet. I'm fine with it. I'm happy on it. I like it, but it's no big culinary adventure. I used to be quite the masterful cook, and I can still turn a small list of ingredients into an interesting way to live. But it's really important that I honor what works for me and what keeps me upright, makes me able to sleep and function. That's all I care about. Can I think, work out, be strong, do stuff in life, get up, be a happy person, whatever it takes to do that, I'm cool. When I have the advantage of being old, like I've been around for almost 6 decades here. I've done all those foods, and any new novel food you come up with, it's okay. I'm happy. I'm content. So I'm not prescribing what I do, but I do believe that most of my clients and most people out there don't eat enough protein, and they need some animal protein in their diet. I highly recommend. I know you can be vegan and still go low oxalate, and that's fine, but that's going to be a high carb diet. And it's going to be tricky to really be happy on that because you have to be careful about the beans. I didn't talk very much about the beans being high oxalate, but on a vegan diet, you kind of need the legumes to get some protein. But you can't have the white beans and the black beans and the pinto beans in huge amounts because there's so much oxalate. You got to soak them for 3 or 4 days and high pressure cook, heat them to get rid of the lectins. Even the low oxalate ones, like the lentils, are really high in lectins. So you have to really carefully manage that. So you can have lentils and peas, like chickpeas and black-eyed peas, are very low in oxalate. You can have them abundantly if you can digest them, but you have to prepare them properly. Mm-hmm. So that's another thing that's been missing from the food conversation for the last 150 years. I didn't learn that in school. We have food class at Cornell when you're a nutrition student, and we learn about gluten balls and baking bread and what acids or bases to keep away from your vegetables to not destroy the B vitamins. And people used to put baking soda in their cooking water, and that wrecks the B vitamins in your vegetables and this and that. Like, you learn those basic things, but you don't learn about lectins and beans in school. And so we're all ignorant about that. So my basic prescription is, if you're not on a high carb diet where you need to be way over there, high carb, you may not be able to get away with as much butter fat and animal fats that I think it makes especially women's brain happy. That's important for reproduction. Egg yolks are really critical during pregnancy and early childhood. And animal foods generally are really important for reproductive health and for tissue maintenance. So I think people should start off the day with protein, emphasize animal style protein, and get enough protein. I think that's the biggest weakness overall. So that's my biggest prescription is try to use animal protein in your diet and try to have a meal be ample enough in animal protein to really keep your tissues maintained and so on. Because we're under eating protein, especially the older you get, your appetite's less and the portions get smaller with elderly people, and they're just starving for protein.
That is my first thing with everybody too. I said, just start with protein. I couldn't agree more with that. I also was wondering what your thoughts were on a meat and fruit diet, or you had mentioned even high carb with people eating more vegan. If you have any problem or issue with someone eating a meat and fruit diet or eating even a high carb diet in general.
I kind of like it, actually. I think meat and fruit are the basic low-hanging fruit of food in nature. That's what you're going to find if you're living in nature. And I think a long-term keto diet is very hard metabolically and can get you into big trouble. I think it's interfering with some people more than others with their whole metabolic health to be ultra low carb and not have the carbs. And the fruit is the most obvious natural way to get carbs. So I'm not a honey fan. I think honey is a bunch of pollen mixed together, and I have so many allergies, like I can't touch it. And a lot of people who have immune system, I'm like, don't eat all that pollen. Like, just, I'd rather you eat sugar than honey because of pollen. I don't like pollen, but some people do great with the honey. It is high in fructose, and there's a huge debate about how evil fructose is or not. When I was coming up in school, they were like, fructose is the bomb because it doesn't raise your blood sugar levels, So we always thought we liked fructose. And then we've had 30 years of fructose being the enemy of mankind. And I think we're going to swing back the other way now. I don't think that keto is the answer to all diseases. I think most of us in the long run need some carbs.
Especially if people are exercising, which I would recommend people do as a form of loving yourself and honoring your body.
If you want to build muscle, your ability to put on muscle is a sign of metabolic health.
Yep. Well, Sally, it was so nice talking with you. Is there a way that people can follow along with you on social media or reach out to you and work with you one-on-one virtually or in person?
Yeah, the best way to reach me and my helpers directly is my website, which is sallyKnorton.com. And on there, people can get a low oxalate cookbook. It's a PDF, about 180 something recipes. I'm mostly on Instagram. SK Norton is my original account. It's simple. Come to my website, look me up on Instagram.